Hey guys, it's Kevin English for Hannibal, Season 3, Episode 2, Primavera. And again, this episode was very different than what I was expecting it to be. I will say, believe it or not, I think last week's episode was definitely stronger. I love this episode. The only thing was, it didn't really tell us anything new. It definitely showed us a new side of Will. My only complaint is it doesn't tell us what's going on with the rest of the cast. And I think it's fine that they're slow pacing. Problem is, we have 13 episodes. We need to not, I get if they want to, stretch the story out. I just don't want them to stretch it out too much, because Jack Crawford and Alana are two very important characters that we need to see their fate, definitely. The only characters we really get their fate of are Will and Abagail. Other than them, we don't get anyone else's fate. So, let's get in this episode. A lot did happen, and there's a lot to talk about, but not as much as I wanted. So we actually start right where we left off. We see Will soaking wet, looking around with a gun. He sees the struggle of Hannibal's house, then sees Abagail crying. She says she didn't know what else to do, so she just did what he told her. He asks where he is. She quakes in fear. Will turns and said, "You were supposed to leave." It's Hannibal standing behind him with a bloody nose. Hannibal says they couldn't leave without him. He strokes Will's face, sticks a knife into him. He groans and grabs him. Hannibal pulls him into an embrace, then seems loving. He says time did reverse and says the teacup he shattered came together. He asks if Will understands, and Hannibal says he wanted to surprise him, and he says he knows Will wanted to surprise him. He lets Will slump to the ground. He says he let Will know him, see him and give him a rare gift, but he didn't want it. And Will says, didn't I? And Hannibal says he would deny him his life, but Will says not his life. So Hannibal says he would confine him to a prison cell. Will gasps his life out. Hannibal asks if he thinks he could change the way he's changed Will. Will tells him that he already did. Hannibal says fate and circumstance return them to that moment when the teacup shattered. He tells Will he forgives him and asks for forgiveness. Will says don't. He says no. Hannibal turns to Abagail, holds out his hand. Will says no. Hannibal holds her close and brutally slices her throat. And you're just thinking, how the hell could they live through this? Like, seriously, how could they have lived through something like this? And, I love the way this is done. Honestly, it was very well done. He lays her down gently. He tells Will he can make it all go away if he lays his head back, closes his eyes. He tells Will to wade into the quiet of the stream. I believe this is pretty much the same scene we saw at the end of the finale. So Will makes his way to her. They lie bleeding together. He sees the horned creature lying there bleeding. Was this his feelings for Hannibal? I mean, the water rushes over it and over to he and Abagail. They are consumed beneath the bloody water. They float down to the abyss. Then the teacup falls and shatters. We see pieces of a face on it, then it all goes back together and reassembles, and I feel like that was supposed to show how shattered everyone is right now and how they are all going to get back together very soon. So Will wakes to monitors beeping in the hospital. His abdomen is bandaged, and we pretty much now see what happened to him. He's alive, and obviously Will had to live. I mean, he is like the main character to this show, so he pretty much has to live. And the doctor, although I would say Hannibal is just as essential now. I think the two main characters now are Will and Hannibal. So the doctor asks how he feels, and Will says he's thirsty. The man hands him a cup. Will sips from a straw. The doctor says there's someone there anxious to see him, and it's Abagail. And I'm like, how the fuck is she alive? Like, her throat was slit. How do you recover from that? I get that, like, you can live from getting your throat slit, but he legitimately was like, grr! Like, he stabbed her throat very roughly, like, how could she have lived through that? I didn't understand that, but apparently she's alive. So, I like that they kept characters alive because you expected them to die, but, I mean, just, wow, I didn't expect her to live, but she's alive, apparently. So, that's interesting. I didn't expect her to live, but that's really cool. Basically, he thinks back to Abigail's wounding at the hands of Hannibal in reverse. He sees her neck spouting copious amounts of blood. And I was wondering here, is she actually here? Is she a figment of his imagination? Because now she says they told her Hannibal knew exactly how to cut her because he wanted them to live. And Will says he left them to die. She says they didn't. She says they were all supposed to leave together, then asks why he lied to Hannibal. Here's the thing. At no point in this episode is anyone else talking to Abagail. He's the only person talking to her. So definitely you can tell something's going on here. He says the wrong thing being the right thing to do was an ugly thought. She says Hannibal gave him a chance, but he kept lying. She says no one had to die. He says it's hard to grasp what would or could have happened in another world. And Abigail says this world is hard enough and hopes another world would be easier. Will says it has to end well and it has to end badly. And he says it has to end every way it can. He says this is the way it ended for them. Abigail says they don't have an ending. It says Hannibal wants them to find him so he can give them the ending. And he asks if she would still go to him. Now, what I kind of thought this is basically Abigail just trying to motivate Will, because you can definitely tell that Will is just, he's not exactly, he definitely is trying to be like the man he is, but he's kind of shattered right now, like the teacup, and she says, if everything that can happen happens, you can't do the wrong thing. You're just doing what you're supposed to, and I definitely agree with Abigail saying, I mean, think of everything that's happened to Will. He was in prison. I mean, Will definitely has been through a lot worse than Hannibal just flat out, almost killing him. He's been through a lot worse than that. And if he can get through, him being in jail and everything, he can do this. So Will wakes from a dream and groans. He touches his bandage. He sees blood seeping out and something coming from his stomach. He wakes in Hannibal's home in his living room. You can tell this isn't real. He pulls out his IV and stands. Papers float down from the sky. He looks around. Now he's dressed. He grabs the paper, sees the drawings he made of the clock faces. One sets on fire. And Hannibal tells Will that when he's gone from his life, they will have this place. And Will asks about his memory palace, and Hannibal says it's vast. Then he talks about places he's seen that are there and mentions Seville. And Will sees Hannibal in front of the fireplace and more papers falling. He sifts through them, looks up, sees a place that Hannibal mentioned, and he's in a hospital bed now and staring upward. Then it's 8 months later. So that basically told us nothing. It told us that he is just recovering. That's all it told us. So Will and Abigail enter the chapel. You still don't know if she's alive or not. He says even in an enlightened world, they come there to feel closer to God. She asks if he feels closer to God, but he says God is not who he came there to find. And that's true. He's there to find Hannibal. So Abigail stares at the priest. She asks Will if he believes in God, and he says he believes something closer to science fiction. He says God can't save them because it's inelegant, and says suffering is more important to his design. She asks if he means Hannibal or God. And I really love this line. This line I thought was really good. He says Hannibal isn't God because it wouldn't be any fun. It says his idea of fun would be denying God. He says he sees the skull that Hannibal mentioned and says Hannibal would love if the roof collapsed on top of all these people, which is true. Hannibal would love that. So Will says Hannibal thinks God would love it too, and they definitely Hannibal has a different idea of God than what everyone else does, which is true. So they look around the chapel some more, and they hear a crumbling noise. Dust wafts down on them as the rood begins to crumble. Blood trickles onto the skull on the floor, where Hannibal placed the torso of his latest victim. And the Italian police talk to the priest while the crime scene tech takes place photos of the carnage. And Will's there with Abigail. She asks if it's him, and the priest gestures to Will. The cop tells them in Italian that they want to talk to them. They go to the local police station. Will sits, and Chief Investigator Pazzi. Now, Investigator Pazzi, I don't want to spoil this. This isn't a spoiler, because they'll tell you this in any behind-the-scenes featurette you'll see of Hannibal. But this is the guy, of course, that does become the Red Dragon. So he is a very essential character, and I love the way they introduced him into the story. I did kind of feel like it was a little bit too early, because it seemed like to me that they were going to make that the second half of the season. But I think it was cool they didn't introduce his character here. I like that. So Chief Investigator Pazzi sits by him. Will says he's a long way of Florence, and Pazzi says he's a long way from Baltimore. And Pazzi says he read about his incarnation, and Will says he was acquitted. So Pazzi says he came to Palermo, then a body is discovered. And he says the priest told him he's been spending a lot of time there. And Will says he's been praying, and Pazzi says praying can give you the feeling you're not alone. Will's called to follow an officer, and Pazzi tells him Cleo. And Pazzi asks Will if he's there because of the body, or the body is there because of him. And Will asks why he's there, and Pazzi says he does what Will does, and basically he is, he does what Will does. He thinks about these murders, and Pazzi says Will grabbed the wrong blade, and I kind of like this. I like this team-up, definitely. I mean, you have Will Graham, and you have the guy that's going to become the Red Dragon. That is an awesome team-up right there. I really like this, I have to say. So Will says he likes knowing, and Pazzi says knowing is better than thinking, especially because this guy is essentially replacing what Hannibal did, because obviously Hannibal's not working with Will anymore, so now this guy is kind of like replacing Hannibal, and I like that. So Will says he likes knowing, and Pazzi says knowing is better than thinking and feeling. He says Will knows who murdered that man, and Will asks if he knows, and Pazzi says he met the monster of Florence 20 years ago. And he says Il Mostro arranged his victims like paintings, and he shows him a couple that was found slaying in the back of a pickup truck. And Will says the scene looked like a Botticelli, and Pazzi agrees, and he shows him a photo of the painting that the taboo was based on, and he asks if the gallery was where he met Il Mostro, and he shows him an older photo of Hannibal, and says he's the monster of Florence, and Pazzi talks about inspiration, says it was a triumph to figure out Il Mostro's inspiration, and he says he went to the Uffizi and stood before the painting day after day. He says he saw a young Lithuanian man there transfixed by him, and we see him sketching. He says he thought Il Mostro would have been that transfix. He said he recreated it in pencil like he did in flesh, and he says it was an epiphany and the best moment of his life, and says it ruined him. And he says he acted in haste and says they almost destroyed evidence at the young man's home. So essentially, Pazzi's going through the same exact thing that Will is, except his man is Il Mostro. I thought that was a really interesting way we got those comparisons to Will and Pazzi, because think about it. Will's life was ruined by Hannibal. I mean, he was placed in jail. Everyone thought he was a murderer. Now he's cool, but, you know, everyone pretty much, I'm pretty sure everyone's going to think he's dead, but Will says he doesn't leave evidence, he eats, he says the man was convicted on no evidence except his character, and Will says blame doesn't stick to Hannibal Lecter. Pazzi says blame sticks to Will, and then hands him a file, and in some ways I can admit that it is kind of Will's fault. I mean, the whole season he was like, Hannibal did it, Hannibal did it. Yes, he was telling the truth. In many ways it is his fault, though. If he would have kept his mouth shut, I don't think Hannibal would have done what he did. Because, of course, the only reason Hannibal did what he did is because everyone found out what he really did, and he wanted to end it, you know, he just wanted to end it all. He wanted to reinvent himself. And Will looks inside, sees photos of the body of the torso that was left on display there, and Will puts himself in the scene as he usually does while profiling. Something I always love about Will is how he just, you know, puts himself into the scene. I think it's really well done. So he stands and looks at the torso and says he splintered every bone and fractured them dynamically. He says he made him malleable. He says, I skinned you, bent you, twisted you, and trimmed you. Hands, arms, and legs. He says it's a topiary. And Will steps closer and reaches out and says, this is my design. He lays a hand on it. He says, it's a Valentine written on a broken man. He hears a clicking sound and then sees the torso pulse. So he backs away as it pulses like a heart. And Will sees it come apart, and then sees it unfolding like it's a headless, handless, footless blob lying there. And he sees antlers come out of the neck stub and begin to form into the beast. It walks awkwardly towards him on stubs, and Will backs away in terror, trips and falls. It comes for him, antlers out. Abagail speaks him, breaks him out of his terror, and he says he feels closer to Hannibal then. Now, we can tell that's not real, but then we see Abagail, and I'm like, is she actually alive? Because, again, I'm very confused at what's going on here. So he says he feels closer to Hannibal than laughs wryly, and he says God only knows where he'd be without him, which is kind of true. I mean, he actually does have Hannibal to thank for a lot. I mean, think of the therapy Hannibal gave him, think of how much Hannibal's done for him. He really did care about him. I think Hannibal truly did care about Will. He just couldn't let Will, you know, put him in jail. He couldn't let that happen. He had to do that, so that's pretty much why that had to happen. So that's something I love about all these characters, that they're so layered, and I love that. So Will comes down and says Hannibal left them his broken heart. She asks how he knows they were there, and Will says he didn't, but knew they would come. And of course, Abagail was always like a daughter to Hannibal, so I think that's why he had to just do what he did to her, because he had to end that chapter of his life and move on. So Abagail says he misses them. Will says Hannibal follows many trains of thought at once without distraction, and always for his own amusement. She says he's playing with them, and Will says always. He asks if she still wants to go with him. She sits and says yes. Will says Hannibal gave her back to him, then took her away. And he says it's Lucy and the football. And Hannibal keeps pulling her away. And he asks what if no one died and what if they all left together like they were supposed to. And Will says after he served the lamb, where would they have gone? And Abagail asks in some other world, and Will repeats it. She smiles. She says he told her he made a place for them. Will says the place was made for her in this world. He says it was the only place you could make for her. The wound in her throat opens. She bleeds. She was never there. We find out that he's completely imagining her. Now, why do I think Will's imagining her? Because she kind of went through the same thing that Will did, and I think he needs some sort of coping mechanism. She really is his coping mechanism right now. And I think it's really interesting that he just was envisioning her the whole time. So I thought that was really good. So Will sits alone and steps to chapel. The saints watch him, and Hannibal's up there too hidden, staring down at Will. Walks away. We see Will being lifted onto a stretcher. And this is what actually happened. We see what I think actually happened. I think everything we've seen in this episode so far didn't actually happen. He stares at open-eyed at Abagail being zipped into a body bag. She's wheeled away. He gives into the blackness. I kind of feel like Will feels guilty that this happened. Her body's taken to the morgue as Will is taken into the operating room. Their clothing is cut off. Both their wounds are swabbed. Her wounds are stitched and his are repaired. Her body is drained of fluids as more are pumped into Will to save his life. Her life blood pours out into the drain. She's covered again. Now Will lies on the steps of the chapel. This is a devastating scene, honestly. It's so devastating to see this. And Hugh Dancy, obviously, he was awesome in this episode. But I think this was definitely one of his best performances as well. Really, it shows the psychological part of Will, and I thought that was great. Especially with Will all by himself. I really do like that. So, Will lies in steps of the chapel, staring up at the ceiling, and Pazzi walks over and asks if he's praying. And Will says, now, I think Pazzi was there the whole time. Pazzi, I think, definitely he was there. So Will says Hannibal doesn't pray, but he believes in God intimately, and Pazzi says he wasn't asking about Hannibal. Will says his prayers would feel constructed by saints and apostles. Will looks around and asks how his prayers feel, and Pazzi says he hopes his prayers flew from there to the open sky and God, and Will says instead of praying that he captures Hannibal, he should pray Hannibal won't capture him, and Will says he couldn't catch him as a kid. Why could he catch him now? And Pazzi says because of Will, and Will asks why he thinks he wants him captured, and which is a good question. I actually like that Will asked that question. He stares down the steps at some flames. He sees blood. He says he should let Il Mostro go if he could be content, and Pazzi says he can't do it any more than Will can. And he says Hannibal will kill him, and he's usually right about these things, which is true. And Pazzi says Hannibal sent him his heart, and he knows him. He asks where Hannibal's gone, and Will says he hasn't gone anywhere. He's still there, and I like what Will's saying. I think what Will's saying is that the presence of Hannibal, even though he's not physically with them, the presence of what Hannibal did will always be with Will. He can never get that back. So he goes down the steps, finds a hallway under the chapel. It's lit by flickering lanterns. He follows it along past skulls and alcoves. He hears footsteps. He calls out to Hannibal. He follows the sound. Pazzi's down there too with his gun out. He follows Will. Will looks around, presses on slowly, hears steps again. He goes through another alcove. Pazzi follows, gun's still out. He calls out to Will. He hears a noise and turns. It's Will who tells him he shouldn't be down there alone. Pazzi says he's not alone, he's with him, but Will says he doesn't know whose side he's on. Pazzi asks what they will do when he finds Il Mostro. Will says he's curious about that himself. Pazzi says they carry Greth with them and both need to unburden. So, again, I really like how he wants to put Il Mostro to death while Will obviously wants to kill Hannibal. So he tells Pazzi he carries death back to the jail before he has to count himself among them. And Pazzi asks Will if he's already dead. He tells him goodnight in Italian, then back to the darkened shadows. And my question is, was Pazzi real? Was Pazzi really there? Or is Will imagining? I don't think Will would imagine someone he doesn't know. Like, that's just kind of strange. So, Hannibal lurks close by. Will keeps going on into the depths. Hannibal now follows him. He calls out to Hannibal, looks around. Hannibal stops, and Will stops too. Will says he forgives him. Hannibal walks away. And now Will's completely alone, and that's how the episode ends. So, what the fuck? What was real in this episode? What just actually happened? I need to know your guys' thoughts. What happened here? Did Will imagine this entire episode? I'm not really sure. I mean, obviously we know that Abigail's, I don't know if we know that she's dead. I don't think she's dead. I think she definitely is alive, but she's in the hospital right now, so did he just imagine this whole thing? Is Pazzi really there? I mean, the Pazzi thing is really interesting. I definitely feel like Pazzi is going to be in this season, but did he imagine him? I mean, the whole Il Mostro situation, did that actually even happen? Are they even looking for a guy named Il Mostro? Because I don't know if they're looking for someone named Il Mostro. That's really interesting to me. Really, I think it is. As far as him saying that he forgives Hannibal, I think maybe seeing Abigail was him realizing that he should forgive Hannibal for what he did, but how can you forgive someone for doing something like that? Like, seriously, how can you forgive something like that? I really don't know what's going to happen in the next episode. Apparently, the next episode, we're going to go back to basics, which is good, because I will say this episode did feel a little bit, again, weird. It throws you off. You think that maybe you're going to see Jack Crawford and Alana again, but you don't. You only see Will and Hannibal and Pazzi and Abigail, who's not really there. So, is Will actually by himself? Is Pazzi there with him? Did any of this episode actually happen? Did he picture this whole thing in his mind? That very well could have been he pictured all this in his mind. I mean, it just doesn't seem... I don't know. I really don't know if he's picturing this in his mind, if this actually happened. I don't know what actually happened. I'm sorry, guys. I know I might sound stupid, but I'm just very confused by what actually happened in this episode. I mean, Pazzi, I think that whole thing is real. Abigail, I don't think is real. That, I think obviously, we know that he imagined her. She was never there. But Pazzi, did that actually happen? But then we saw Will in the hospital, of course. So, is he just in the hospital imagining things? I'm not really sure what's fully going on. But I'm very intrigued, definitely. Very intrigued. I can't wait to see what happens in the next episode. I'm definitely very interested in seeing what's going to happen. Next week, Jack Crawford is back. We're going to get the Hannibal story with Bedelia again. So, definitely I'll have a lot more to talk about next week. And if these videos seem too short, too, it's just because I don't have a lot to talk about in this episode. I don't have a lot to say because I don't know what's real. Okay, I don't even know, is Il Mostro a real thing? Is this just some guy that Will saw and just made up a story so he could relate to him? I'm not really sure. I'm just not really sure what's real and what's imaginary. I don't know what Will imagined and what actually happened. I mean, obviously he imagined Abigail. Besides that, obviously he imagined Hannibal as well. Did he imagine, Posse, I'm not really sure. Well, let's see what happens there. But that's my review. Hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what you guys saw this episode. Overall, guys, another great episode. Really loved it. Definitely very strange, but that's Hannibal. That's to be expected. I'll see you guys in the next video, which will be my review for Daredevil, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.